welcome everyone. We are in Santa Barbara City College, but this is a joint event between Antioch and Santa Barbara City College, okay? So welcome all of you. I am Anna Kwong, Antioch's chair of the undergrad program. You're wondering, every year we will do a leadership panel, and then you probably think about why is it we're doing it in April, right? So because that's supposed to be in March. I'm sure even the panelists have this question. The reason is because March the 8th always rests on our final examination day at Antioch. So therefore, instead of doing it during the time, so that most students cannot take advantage of it, so we do it in the new term in April, okay? For those of you who don't know much about Antioch, we are right here at Santa Barbara City College. We moved in here because we lost our Kota campus to the storm, okay? So at least we are here for the time being. And also is that we have a very close relationship with Santa Barbara City College. Our undergrad program has a guaranteed pathway for students to finish the BA program in 1 year. We call it the 3+1. The reason why we can make this happen is because we study each other's curriculum very well and in depth, so that when students come to our Antioch program, they don't repeat taking similar classes. So therefore, students will save time and save money. And if they're interested in moving to the graduate school, 2 more years and you would get a master's degree. So this is Antioch University. Oh, thank you. And we have our 2 admission staff, Ms. Jody Burns and Coco. Coco is an alumni from SBCC and Antioch. Okay, now she's working for us. So if you're interested to find out more about the program, please check out with them. And of course, now I want to invite my partner here, okay, Croyle Smith, the Vice President of the School of Extended Learning. You can talk about your program.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see all of you here. As Anna said, my name is Croyle Smith. I serve as the Vice President of our School of Extended Learning. And you may wonder, what is the School of Extended Learning? We are, of course, part of Santa Barbara City College, and we serve approximately 10,000 adult learners at any given time. We offer a wide array of programs and courses, ranging from specific courses for our older adult population, parenting, basic skills, English language development. And then what may be a little bit less known is we also have a lot of opportunities for adult learners to take career education courses and workforce development courses. And those are primarily offered through our Career Skills Institute, and we offer about 35 different LinkedIn badges and certificates. I think we have a little bit of information outside, and I want to give a shout out to our SEL team. So if you can wave your hand. Yes, these are the people that make our program possible. Thank you. And I want to thank our amazing lineup of panelists for being here today and sharing your expertise. I really am excited about this panel and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Croyle. Okay, so my job is that now we're going to get out of here because we will let the experts talk, right? So my job is just to introduce the moderator, our moderator. And every time I introduce my moderator, Dr. Lois Phillips, she'll call me and say, make it short, make it short, make it short. Because her achievement is amazing. And I try to brag about her because she is our very founder of Antioch Santa Barbara, okay? Without her, we won't have Antioch Santa Barbara here, okay? Thank you so much, Antioch. Dr. Phillips was the founding director of Antioch University Santa Barbara and later a consultant to community colleges. She's the co-author of Women Seen and Heard series, public speaking coach, and guest commentator for the Pacific Business Times in March regarding businesswoman advancement. Okay, so I will pass the mic to Dr. Lois Phillips and let her introduce all our VIPs panelists, okay? Yes.
So much, Anna. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that. And I'm thrilled to be facilitating a discussion with these amazing women who are outstanding leaders. I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to introduce them to you and then talk a little bit about the context for this event with its very impressive title. So we're going to talk about what the title means before we start. But first, on my left, I'd like to introduce you to Professor Emeritus Everett, who is a media historian and formerly a professor of film studies and media studies at UCSB, which is also my alma mater. And she is the author of many things. She was the founding editor of the journal Screening Noir and the author of Returning the Gaze, A Genealogy of Black Film Criticism, and Digital Diaspora, A Race for Cyberspace. That's a title. Fascinating. And she is presently on the board of trustees for Santa Barbara City College. So let's give her a warm welcome. Second to her left is Dean Jackie Gardina. She is the dean and the chief academic officer for the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law. You may have seen the facility downtown. And Dean Gardina plays an active role in the broader legal education community as a member of the California Attorney Practice Analysis Working Group, CAPA. And she's done a lot of research about the state of the profession. She is chair of the State Bar Committee for Accredited and Registered Law Schools. And she is also the co-host of a wonderful podcast I recommend called Sidebar. So keep that in mind. Welcome, Jackie Gardina. And to her left is Professor Tania Israel, who has a very busy schedule also, and she is going to have a lot to say on this topic. She's an American psychologist and professor in the Everett Graduate School of Education at UCSB. And her research focuses on the development and implementation of interventions to support the mental health and well-being of LGBTQ individuals and communities. And recently, she was appointed as Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, and Faculty Equity Advisor for the Everett School. She is also an author with many books to her credit, Beyond Your Bubble, How to Connect Across the Political Divide. Do we need that? Yes. Skills and Strategies for Conversations That Work, Dr. Waffle and Friends, Creative Collaboration Podcast, and also has a new book coming out soon called Facing the Fracture. Welcome, Tania. And finally, we have Linda Croyle. She has had a consulting group that was very successful for many years and I believe, teaches through Santa Barbara City College, School of Extended Learning, courses that are very popular. She has over 30 years of experience in values-based organizational management and development, a master's degree in Human Development and Psychology from Harvard, and a BA in Physical Education from St. Lawrence University. Understandably, she has 20 years as a natural health practitioner. This is a busy woman, and focused on brain science. So she is now returning to UCSB with a full-time job as Director of Organizational Development for the Housing Division. Welcome, Linda. So we are talking about emotional agility, and I think it's very important that I try to distinguish between EQ, emotional intelligence, which was very trendy, still is very trendy, and not just for professionals, but for the lay public. And you've always heard people refer to their EQ is higher than their IQ sometimes. And it's basically the ability to manage both your emotions and understand the emotions of people around you. There are 5 key elements to EQ, EI: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Now, it's very similar when we talk about emotional agility, looking at the definitions that I found online and in books. This is the process of accepting your emotions and using them as information so that you're flexible and resilient, you're able to be in the present and use what you are aware of to make decisions based on your values. So there's more of a proactive component to that, as I understand it. You're agile. We know about agility. So you're flexible, you're resilient, and that's very relevant to the topic at hand here, because we're talking about a world that is going through tremendous transformations. And I wanted to read, to start us off in terms of context, the recent study by the American Psychological Association, and it was a study called Work and Well-Being. They found that almost 80% of over 1,500 employees surveyed experienced work-related stress. 3 in 5 said the stress caused them to have a lack of interest, motivation, and energy at work. They had cognitive weariness, emotional exhaustion, and even physical fatigue. Then there was another study of 300,000 cases from an analysis by ComPsych, another research organization, and they said that anxiety is now the #1 presenting issue among workers, topping depression, stress, partner relationship issues, family issues, addiction, grief. And this really is very much to the point in talking with people who are managers, executives, leaders about today's workforce, in which we see tremendous uncertainty. And we've experienced it here locally with natural disasters, you all know what I mean, as well as the COVID experience that was, some describe as a trauma for the country and the world. So we're going to get some insights and wisdom from people who have to deal with people every day, and decision makers, as well as staff and students. So I'm going to start this off, that's probably the most you'll hear from me, by asking each of the panels. I'll start with you, Anna. I hope it's okay, we'll use first names here, to tell us about your role, your leadership role, and what you do, who you work with, and what it's like.
Well, thank you for that question, also for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone. So I am currently the Vice President of the Santa Barbara City College Board of Trustees, and I work with 6 other very dynamic and committed and dedicated trustees for the college across the county. So one of the things that's important, I think, to point out is that this is only one of several leadership positions that I've had, but this is the first one that is public facing. And so whereas some of the decisions that I would make normally and not have to be as aware of what I'm saying, and therefore could address my emotional agility in different ways when you're in the public and the public sees everything that you do, it becomes a little more difficult and challenging. So I think one of the things I want to point out is that I was onboarded during COVID. I was elected in 2020, and so I had done my orientation to the position online. And when we were forced to come back, I was not ready for that. But because I had gotten used to and enjoyed, doing my work virtually. So I've been adjusting, and I've been really experiencing what it means to be emotionally agile, because I learned who Susan David is, who wrote the book. And I'm glad to know that I've been doing it intuitively, but now I know some of the strategies and some of the specifics. So I'll just stop there for the moment.
Yeah, we'll come back to those strategies. So yes, we'll just pass the baton here.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Again, Jackie Gardina. I'm the Dean of the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law. And my role as the Dean requires me to interact with, obviously, our staff, our faculty, our students, the legal community, the accrediting community, which is both the State Bar of California as well as regional accreditor WASC. So it requires kind of the ability to move among stakeholders that have different needs, different, just different audiences. So it does require us to step lightly among all those different stakeholders. And I think in addition to that, we have both remote workers and remote students because we have an online and a hybrid program, and we have on-campus staff, on-campus faculty, and on-campus students. Very different needs, very different managing kind of what it means to be a remote worker or having on-campus and remote workers or on-campus and remote students interact together is also part of what I've had to learn to do in the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
So again, I'm Tania Israel, and I'm an Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UCSB for the last couple of years. Before that, I was chair of my department for a number of years, and I've had some other leadership positions on campus. But I also, over the last number of years since I've been doing work on navigating political division, I've been invited into lots of other people's workplaces too. And so what I've seen is how, the global pandemic has affected us, but also how political tensions have seeped into workplaces. And so I feel like we have a lot of different things that we're grappling with right now. And one of the ways that shows up, maybe we can talk more about at some point, is just some intergenerational differences, maybe some different expectations that people have about the way emotions will be dealt with in the workplace and the way values are dealt with in the workplace. So I've just had a number of observations both within my own workplace, but also getting a peek inside other settings as well.
I captured that. Okay, we'll come back to it. Intergenerational, yes. Linda.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Linda Croyle. Really happy to be here. And I had worked at UCSB for over 20 years in housing, in residential life, as one of the assistant directors and dealing directly with student issues and concerns and making sure that 1,350 18-year-olds all living in one building get along as well as can be expected. And I took an early retirement, and I began a consulting practice, and I teach it in the human skills part of the Career Skills Institute. And that's been a joy to kind of have been in the thick of it, and then to kind of pull the lens back and take a look at what is the skill set? What are the skill sets that people need to have to negotiate these times? I honestly have to say, I wasn't there in the thick of COVID, which is kind of a relief, but I'm going back there, as you mentioned, as the Director of Organizational Development. So I see it as kind of this beautiful coming around, because I feel so much better equipped having taught all these courses. My main thing is I got to learn and I got to teach. So what I'm seeing more of in my consulting, I'm asked to come in and talk about multi-generational diversity, DEI in general, and there is a disconnect going on, because of all the different super disruptors that we've been talking about that are going on in the world, the pandemic and the political divide and what I like to call racial reckoning. I think we're taking strides to really make the world a more just place. And I'm getting called in because people are struggling, and mostly with multi-generational diversity, because we've got the people going, okay, boomer, and the other people going, well, kids these days, and we've been saying kids these days since Heraclitus, yeah, right? So Greek philosophers were saying that. So, we have to get better. And I developed an acronym because it was working, right? So it's how do we retain people? And it started off, how do we retain young people? And it turns out that it's really how we retain anyone. And it's actually spells retain. So the first thing is respect. The second thing is engage. People do want to be engaged, whether they appear to want to or not. People need to be trained, especially young people. They're undeveloped. They haven't had the same experiences some of us have had. Appreciate, A is for appreciate, I is for invest in them, and N is for negotiate. And we're going to have to work together, really, as the younger generations and the older generations, to build the new workforce, which hopefully will be less stressful anyway. So.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Tania then with your reference to the dimension of intergenerational workforces, people working together who are 10, 20, 30 years apart, the older generation not being quite as comfortable with this high-tech, fast-paced workplace and so forth. So say something about your experiences with that divide or challenge.
Sure, and I can talk about this, and I'm hoping Linda will also join in because I know that you teach about this as well. One of the things that I've observed just in terms of how we deal with emotions in the workplace is that there's a generation, that's come into the workplace environment and certainly come into our classrooms also, who have been trained to interrupt microaggressions, for example, and trained to, try to protect people who are vulnerable from some of the hostile environment kinds of factors that happen in our educational and our workplace and our societal and family and all kinds of environments. So that's not something that's not necessarily the same perspective that people have had, before that coming into workplaces, that it's, about protecting people. We've certainly had the idea of workplaces as a hostile environment related to sexual harassment since at least the 80s. But all these other factors, and the racial reckoning is part of that, being more trauma-informed in our approaches is part of that. So there are a number of things focusing on, like, what's the role of the workplace and leaders in the workplace and coworkers in terms of protecting people from those negative experiences. Trigger warnings is another example of that. And so I think that there's a difference in expectations about how protective we are supposed to be toward people in the workplace.
I wanted to just comment, you started me thinking yesterday on the news, Lori Levinson, who's at Loyola Law School, I think in LA, commented on the OJ trial, and she was talking about teaching that as a case study, looking out at her law students, none of whom were born when this was happening, and she had to pull out all the old archives to say, who is he again? And so, it's like a knowledge base and a set of experiences that older people have, and a set of values and approaches to work that can be clearly outdated and make them feel like a fish out of water. Would you comment on the law school as an organization with intergenerational situations, challenges?
Absolutely. So I think colleges of law is a little bit unique because we do serve an adult working population, but within that, we might have a 22-year-old who just got out of undergrad, and we might have a 60-year-old who is pursuing a dream delayed. And you're right, the understanding of the system, the belief in the system even. I think older people raised in a God Bless America, patriotic kind of background as I was, have a belief in the system and its integrity in a way that I think younger people who have been exposed to and are more able to and talk about and point to injustices are not. So kind of mapping that in the classroom between students, but then you also have attorneys and judges that are teaching the classes who are also older and working within the system and managing their reaction to students and having them be aware of what they're reacting to in the classroom is equally as important.
And Anna, I'm thinking about being on the board of trustees. You are going to be hearing from stakeholders who are college students, as well as the community at large and organizations and so forth. There's a very diverse range. So can you talk a little bit about how you're experiencing some of those demands to hear and to get people to reach consensus who come from very different generations, I'm sure?
I really appreciate that framing and also some of the comments about the intergenerational adjustments to the new workplace and workforce in the COVID endemic, because we're not post-COVID at all. So in terms of the board, I think one of the things that's so interesting is that we have a generation that's pretty much kind of consistent in terms of age, but we also have a student trustee, and it's really great to have that insight and that participation, and that role changes every year, but each year we've had some dynamic students that are involved. I think also we have the benefit of hearing from students who are engaged and come and make presentations to the board. So we get to hear some of the things that are affecting their lives right now and what they're engaged with and what their concerns are and what matters to them. I think a couple of things I wanted to just return to about this workforce that does affect our lives as trustees is, and particularly me, having to adjust to a role online for 2 years, and then the second 2 years coming back in person and making that kind of change, but understanding how the hybrid workspace is so critical, and we have been able to address several things like the Great Resignation. So we know a lot of people are at jobs because they choose to be there and they've left, so there's a different level of engagement with workforce politics and workforce culture and climate. So people are less willing to tolerate things now, having experienced COVID and feeling that life is, kind of tenuous at best. And so it's like, take this job and shove it, and they really meant it. And so retaining people has been a real big push. And I think also this question about the racial reckoning, I think one of the things for me that's so important about emotional agility is I know that there is a retrenchment and a kind of backsliding from DEIA. And people are starting to feel like we don't really need to do that. We've been there, we've done that, we've conquered it. And so all the promises that were made post George Floyd, businesses especially are now retrenching from that. And so I think we're at a moment that's really critical. At the same time, I think young people recognize that even though the issue of being loyal and understanding the system and trusting the system, is something that young people aren't as willing to do the way our generation has. They also recognize they have power. When they elected Obama, helped elect Obama, they was like, we can change the world, we can change the system. And so I think that there's that desire and that willingness to kind of challenge and go there, but also the belief that it can be done. So I think that there's a way that we have to address that as well.
I'm wondering about the word disruption. We think about disruptors. I mean, technology is a huge disruptor in the way we do anything, and it keeps changing, and it keeps making new demands. And now, in response to demands by students or staff or faculty or the world, there are changes in protocols and procedures, and DEI didn't exist when I went to UCSB, I can tell you that. I had not one woman professor in the Graduate School of Education, where women make up the mainstay of teachers. So that was 20 years ago. So lots has changed. But I wonder if there's a disruption in particular besides the technology disruption, whether it's political or what's happening in the larger world, that you might, Linda, you look like you might have something to say in response to that.
I have all the answers.
Good.
So
Well, you're
whisper
nodding
them
a
in my
lot,
ear.
so you're my backup, no matter.
Well, I think we really are at it's a critical juncture, right? Everything's a critical juncture. It's gonna, and we have the research that shows how high self-reported mental issues or mental wellness issues are in Gen Z in particular, but I think we're all experiencing that as well. And I think what's happening is Gen Z and millennials are forcing baby boomers entrenched in the old ways of doing things to rethink this. And I think there's some short-sightedness going on because if we, once you're here long enough, you'll figure it out. Like that doesn't work. Because young people, if you look at the statistics, and I taught an all-day class on emotional intelligence 2 days ago, young people in upwards of 65 to 75% will not take a job or will not stay at a job that does not, if they don't think their boss or their potential boss is going to support DEI efforts. They're not going to stay if there's not gender equity in the leadership, and they're not going to stay if there's not racial diversity in the leadership. That's 65 to 75% of young people who are going to be the workforce. In 10 years, they're going to be 30% of the workforce. And we have some states who are like saying, no more diversity. no more DEI. We're canceling the whole, we're talking about people don't like to cancel or canceling, these initiatives. How do we learn about each other if we're not going to be taught, if we're not going to be able to have conversations about this? And I do have a LinkedIn learning video. It's called Diversity Through Generations, Increasing Inclusivity in the Workplace. And somebody was mentioning it on a Facebook post, somebody I didn't know, said, oh, I saw this, this class is really good, you should take it. And there was a comment in the thing that said, well, I live in Texas and I can't take any classes that say diversity in the title. So that's where we're coming from, and we're cutting off our nose to spite our face, which is the baby boomerest thing anyone could say up here. But it means like we're trying to do something and it's just going to completely backfire unless we get out ahead of it. And I think that's where young people are really, their insistence that we change our language, and that's why I said that the last piece of retain is negotiate. Like, well, so how do we do it and, keep the work going, and there is a way. We just have to keep opening our minds and having these great conversations.
I'd like to hear about the law school, because I'm thinking about the changes in legal education. For example, there are degrees being offered that never existed 5 or 10 years ago to allow people to become legal practitioners in different ways. So I know you can speak to changes in attitudes about your field.
So the attitude change is not coming from within the field. Lawyers are very rigid about who can practice law, and it's them, not anybody else. But I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, there are states out there. So we have a huge access to justice problem in the United States. About 89% of middle American and low income Americans cannot afford an attorney, or don't even know they need one, or that they recognize that there's a legal solution to what they're facing. Imagine tenant landlord or consumer debt situations. So what some states have done to address those kinds of issues is to create an alternative practice pathway. So someone who can take a kind of paralegal plus kind of degree and get a limited license within that state to help with consumer debt problems or family law problems or things where there's lots of people who aren't represented and need representation, maybe bankruptcy. Something like that. Not all states have accepted that. California, and it was really the legal bar who put the kibosh on it, tried to get a practitioner pathway going, and it was squashed. Because every state has some law called you can't engage in the unlicensed practice of law. And so it's very tricky to figure it out. But in terms of disruption, how many of you can Google something and figure out and get an answer regarding a legal issue? Don't do that. I'm not recommending it. But people do. And now they're creating entire apps dedicated to helping you understand your rights. They have to be very careful about saying this isn't legal advice, but it's allowing people to get around the need, at least initially, for an attorney and or to figure out whether or not they need one. So technology is definitely disrupting the legal field and the legal profession. They're called alternative legal professional service providers, like LegalZoom or the like. There used to be a time where you could go to the store and it was nolo contendere, and you could buy a paperback that had like, here is your, what a will looks like, and you just had to fill it out. And so this is just a more advanced version of that. But I think the other disruption in legal education and the legal field is how quickly the law is changing. Or how quickly it feels as if it's shifting underneath our feet in ways that people from a different generation were like, we fought for those rights, we got those rights in place. Suddenly this next generation is having the ground shake beneath them. Affirmative action, race-conscious admission in higher education, now gone. Reproductive freedom, now gone. The Comstock Act lurking in the background, potentially to create a nationwide abortion ban. So even those in states where they are protected, there could be issues involved. So, I mean, the Fugitive Slave Act is reborn now but in the guise of criminalizing women who travel for abortion. So I think one of the things that is helpful in talking about emotional agility in the context of disruption, and one of the benefits of the kind of education we do is we get to say, all right, how are you going to solve this problem? What are the legal and procedural mechanisms available? How would you go around attempting to fix what's happening right now? What are all the different avenues you could take to try to reach that end goal that we all have? And so I think one of the benefits of being in the legal education field is that we get to be problem solvers. We create some of the problems for sure, but then we get to solve them.
Tania, do you want to respond to this?
Yes, I really appreciate thinking about emotional agility in terms of how does that operate in a politically polarized environment, because that's one of the huge disruptions that we're having right now in our society. And I think that there's some very useful things about the idea of, drawing on flexibility and grounding ourselves in our values. But the grounding ourselves in our values, I think, sometimes has been at the, has meant us giving up trying to understand anybody else's values. And it's put us in a very difficult situation where it's like there's only one way that's the just way, or that's the inclusive way. And so I think that as we think about not whether or not we do diversity, but how we do diversity, not about whether or not we're inclusive, but how we're doing it, I think that we're strongest if we try to bring forth a curiosity and a desire to understand a perspective other than the one that we already hold. And I think that that's actually a crucial piece that I would add on to the emotional agility piece, is that that ability to take multiple perspectives and to be able to have empathy or insight for people who are different from ourselves. And I think that's actually a very important quality to be able to use our emotional agility effectively in a polarized situation.
Are you suggesting that, in a way, you, in a managerial, supervisory leadership role, are also educating people to other perspectives? Is that a part of that, in addition to being authentic, being present, sharing your own concerns, thoughts? I'm wondering.
I would say, rather than educating people about another perspective, if we can educate people about how to learn about another perspective, so that we're not saying this is what these other people are like, but we're saying this is, okay, my favorite question these days, because I feel like everybody puts out there what they believe, to say, this is what I believe, and this is, and so you should believe it too. Or this is what I believe, and this, justifies my actions or my position. What if we said, this is what I believe, and so that's the limitation of my understanding on this issue. What am I missing? What more can you tell me that will help to advance my understanding and broaden my understanding? That, to me, is, if we can teach that curiosity and that approach and that desire to understand something beyond our own view, that's so much more valuable than teaching about other people.
Not just the information. Did you want to jump in here in terms of your role on the board, the diverse stakeholders, and maybe some of the assumptions you made about those stakeholders where you may have had to pivot a little bit? I'm wondering.
That's a really important, I think, question to consider when you're a member of the board, because you are juggling, several issues at once, and you are responsive to many constituents. I know for me, one of the things that I had to learn about my position was learning my lane. I mean, one of the things that happens is that you are so committed to your job and you think that you can go and be interested and engaged in everything. So online, I was very interested in diversity issues as a member of the board, and I would show up at some of the meetings online that said everyone is welcome. And I got a little bit of pushback. I didn't realize that I was stepping outside of my lane because I didn't understand the power dynamic of a trustee as opposed to regular constituents there. So I was surprised because I thought I was, I had the best of intentions. I was there and it was about DEI and it was my main interest for helping to contribute something substantively that I had an expertise in. So once I learned that my voice was louder than everybody else's because of my position, I had to learn that, yes, there are some aspects about staying in your lane that count. Sometimes you have to veer out of your lane because it's necessary and you have to share something. But I learned that, and it gave me a sense of pause, that there's an ability to leverage your power, but there's also a recognition that you have to pull back on your power. So I think that's one of the things that I learned. I think the other thing that I learned about the board is that as you hear from the various constituents, you get to recognize that there are so many points of view and that you want to be able to hear. And you don't want to be judgmental, but you also understand that you bring something to the table as well. So it is a constant negotiation, but I have found it to be valuable because we do have input from the public, and it's also scary because the public recognizes everything that you do. So you have to be mindful of modeling the kind of emotional agility that's going to be effective and hold to your values, but at the same time be open and hear and let people know you hear what they're saying. And your various positions. But I've loved it, and I've loved getting to know the various aspects of how the college operates and what my role is to help assist in those missions.
We haven't talked about the budgetary aspect of leadership, and I don't think we need to dwell on it, but I was just thinking about the Board of Trustees. When you are thinking about running for office and you read up on everything you need to know about your power and authority and what it is you're going to have to deal with, and then there's a situation and then something changes. The state decides to do something that you didn't think they were going to do, and we don't need to go down that road, but all of a sudden there are surprises that have to do with money and people and staffing and roles that people play when you get to a certain level. And it's an enormous responsibility because there are people's lives at stake if you decide to reorganize, for example, or create a new Department of DEI or a new program. There's going to be people who are unsettled by any change, much less a personnel change, and especially when it's suggested by the budgetary piece of your leadership role. I wanted to segue to this notion of the assumptions that you make, because assumptions about work have changed, and you're in a position now where, according to all the research, people are realizing as a result of COVID that their personal life, their mental well-being is very important, and that comes into a negotiation and a decision about work. And in a way, they have all the cards, especially if you want to retain talent. So I'm wondering if you have been affected in any negotiation with personnel where you felt they had all the cards, because work was not as important to them as their personal and family life. I'm wondering about this intergenerational point of view about work, which is suggested by all the research. So anybody experience that with people that they work with, where they are thinking very differently about the importance of work? Tania,
Can I answer a different question? Because what Anna said made me think of something that it's sort of related.
Go.
But it has to do with leadership, and it has to do with when you are in a position of power, how that changes things. And so it's sort of related to your question, Lois, also about, when you're in a position of power, you actually have to constrain yourself in some ways, that you don't have to do as much when you're not in a position of power. And that's something
It's
that...
easy to criticize people who have power, too.
Yes.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, you're the one in that role,
Oh,
in that
yes,
chair.
indeed. It's shocking when, you're like, oh no, I'm the man. And so but it's important because when I've taken on leadership roles, and then I'm dealing with all the same people who had been my peers, like last week, but now I'm in this position of authority. And so they're reacting to me differently, and I actually do need to adjust to that. Like, I can't always be as free as I would be otherwise, and I have to also be aware that they're experiencing me as exerting power on them. And so I think that those negotiations, yeah, you can feel like, somebody's holding all the cards, but if you are in the position of power, they're actually not. And I think that when we sort of behave as if, they have all the power, and we ignore our own power, then actually that puts us in a very precarious situation and doesn't honor them and where they are, too.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Anna?
I did have an example, and it has to do with one of the first leadership roles I took was at UCSB as the director of the Center for Black Studies. And my mentor, who held the position before, Dr. Claudine Michel, was explaining to me that one of the hardest things about any leadership job is personnel and the HR component. Because no matter what you do, you have other people that you're working with, and it's always going to be the most difficult part. And so I had an instance with, with someone who was working with me, but I was the boss. And it was, I had this one person who was just the best at the job, but we had a conflict because I was new and I was coming in and I wanted this person to be on time. And this person was coming in and staying late. And there was a conflict between, yeah, but when you think about East Coast, West Coast, you need to be here in the morning. It doesn't help when you're late and, nobody can get in touch from the, whatever. So we had these time zones and it was a big conflict. So I had to understand, it's like, do you want this person to leave who's one of the best at the job because you want them to come in early? Okay, make an adjustment. So I had to do that emotional agility and pivot. And I was like, okay, all right. So we're going to have the situation where, I will accept the fact that you're going to come in an hour later, which means I'm okay coming in and doing some of that because I know how good you are. You have to make those choices and those decisions. And it worked out because in that negotiation, then we both became willing to work with each other. And, so I think that's one of the ways that you're always having to kind of think about that power dynamic and that differential. And I wanted that person to be happy to stay, but I also needed to get done what I needed to get done. So we had to come to that.
And there are those
Détente.
situations where you think, I could be setting a precedent here where everybody comes in an hour late. So those are the moments when you really have to struggle and stand up for the decision you make. So you were going to comment, Jackie, I think, on this.
Yeah, I think the other thing, you're talking about it as if it's a one-to-one negotiation, but that person is part of a larger team within the institution or workplace. So you can't think about it in terms of what that person wants alone. You have to think about what it is that the institution or the workplace as a whole needs. We've had situations at work, sadly, where people have had individuals in their lives with serious health situations and they've needed to take FMLA or something like that. Completely understandable. The team understands and are willing to step up and fill the void. But if I just negotiated that for reasons because they said, I want to spend more time with my family, so I only want to come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and 2, well, that's going to be a problem for the rest of the team, and it's not going to be fair for the rest of the team. So you have to be really clear about what it is, the context of your negotiation, and think about not just the individual who is sitting across from you, but all the individuals that are not in the room, but who would be affected by whatever decision you make in relation to that negotiation.
I wanted to keep going with Anna's example and ask, either of you three, if you had a specific example of a moment in which you had to be emotionally agile. You had a point of view, you understood the situation, you were pretty okay going forward, and then there's a moment where you have to pivot. Has that happened to any of you that you could give a specific example?
Well, I can share a personal example where I had to pivot for myself, and I think it really speaks to emotional agility, and especially, I think, during Women's History Month or Women's Appreciation Month or whatever it's officially called. When I worked at UCSB, I was very passionate about a lot of issues, including DEI, because I was new to it too. I got there, had a training, got my white girl blinders blown off, and I was like, oh my gosh. Wait a minute, this has been going on and I didn't know this. And so I made a pledge to myself to really dive in and do the best I could to make, other people aware of this. And a huge issue. So I gave my all. I was working, all day, and then I'd be at night, we'd be writing letters to the editor, and we'd be meeting, and we'd be caucusing, and we'd be, what do we do next, what do we do next? And then I ended up being at a 3-day conference where we would recruit people, and on the way home, on the train, I took a train from Boston to New York, and I just started crying. I was like, who is this? I don't even know who I am. And by the time I got to New York City, I said, I can't go back to work. And I've never, ever, ever said anything like that. And what I wasn't doing is I wasn't being emotionally agile. I was in my activist, pedal to the metal, burning the candle at both ends for all the right reasons, but I wasn't checking in to see how I was feeling. I wasn't monitoring my own stress levels. I mean, I've been a lifelong athlete. I was running 5 miles a day, but it's not, and I used to think, if I can run 5 miles, I can do anything. That's not it. It's a whole range of taking care of ourselves, which I think sometimes we women don't do as well either. So I ended up taking a stress leave, and first, I think I was embarrassed too, so I wouldn't even tell people. And even now when I share it, some people are like, I don't know if you want to share that. I'm like, you got to share that because I don't want other people falling into that same trap. So we've got to, this emotional agility, as I'm understanding it, is really about checking in, like, what am I feeling right now? And, so I was thinking about even today, what am I feeling today? As what part of the Susan David, invitation in a podcast that I was listening to, and she says, so I said, stress, right? And then she says, well, a typical exercise would have you flip the page over and say what you're grateful for. And I was pretty good about that. I'm grateful I have a job to be stressed about or to be passionate about areas that I have a lot of work to do. And but what she says we should really be doing is asking ourselves, it's a signpost for you. What is the stress telling you? Not how can I just put a positive spin on it and keep moving through it, which is what I did. So that's the piece I think I wanted to bring forward today, is that this is a super stressful time for many of us. But if we just call it stress, that's just not acknowledging, like, how do we pull that apart and what is the stress telling us? And am I exhausted? And if I'm exhausted, is it because I'm not in my passion area or I'm not taking care of myself? So that's kind of what I was thinking about coming in, and the conversation among us here has made me think about that as a personal experience of, I did come back. I'm still here today. I'm going back to UCSB in 2 weeks. So, I've gotten a little bit better at it. Yeah.
It's with a lot more wisdom. Tania, do you have a specific example that comes to mind of a moment?
Remember that thing I just said about, like, people who are in leadership positions and have all this power, they shouldn't, impose our power on other people. I learned that the hard way. So, I realized I should have just been making I statements there. So I was in a position where I had some power, and I really, and it was the pandemic. It was like early days of the pandemic, and I really needed somebody to step up into a leadership position. And I had a conversation with a colleague. We had a very good relationship, and but I was so stressed about this moment because it turns out like the pandemic was affecting everybody, right? So it's like she's stressed about it, I'm stressed about it, and I was really needing somebody to do this, and she ended up feeling like I was really pressuring her, and she just like, shut the conversation down, and I realized, like, oh no, like, look what I've done. Like, I'm in a powerful position here. She's experiencing all this stress. And even though I was experiencing stress too, because I was in a position of power, I really needed to find a way to keep that in check in a way that I think that you don't need to when you're not in that position, because I was in a role where I had some authority. So it's and what's been difficult, is like it's hard to repair those ruptures, when you've done that. So I think what I learned from that was, exactly what I said. Like, when we're in a position of power or authority, we need to recognize that other people are responding to us as if we have power, because we do. So it's particularly important for us to take care of ourselves, and for us to, when we are experiencing that stress and all of that, to find ways of attending to it so that we're not inflicting that on others. I don't know, that's what I think. I'm kind of curious what Linda thinks about me saying that. I feel like you know a lot about sort of the way stress works through us and how to heal things. And so, I don't know, my question.
Manifestation. Jackie, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on what both of you said in terms of kind of that learning moment for me, and one that I hope that I carry into the work I do now, which is, we have to redefine what success means in our life, or challenge what it means to fail. And I know I grew up in that kind of environment where you're supposed to push through everything, no matter what. And I hit a wall that I couldn't push through. And it turned out I was in the midst of a major depression, and I had no idea. And I just needed to stop. I was getting a master's in social work at that time. I had to leave the program. I was working, trying to work my way through college. I had to leave work, and I had to heal. And like you, my feeling was, I have failed, because you're just supposed to push through. You're not supposed to stop. And in retrospect, it was the strongest thing I ever did, because I had to challenge all of those messages, and I had to take a different turn. And now when students come to me, or even staff, I can say, it's okay for you to take a leave of absence from school. In fact, that is the bravest thing to do in this situation. But redefining what it means to fail or to succeed, that's within our own power. And I really want people to challenge those societal messages about what it means to be selfish, or to take care of yourself, or to put yourself first. Especially for women, I think it's especially challenging. But it was life-changing for me. It was a huge pivot for me, both personally and then hopefully professionally. And I also think saying that out loud, I had a friend who created something called Failure Camp. Everyone would come together for an evening and talk about failures. And things that we could learn from each other, but also laugh about and just normalize. Everyone struggles. Everyone trips up. Everyone does what's considered a failure. I cannot write an email without a typo. I swear to God, I read it over and over. And like 2 hours later, I find the typo after I've sent it to 150 people. So it happens. It doesn't end the world. It's a mistake. And that's all right.
It's a great point. Anna, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just two things. I wanted to also address the issue of what Susan David's ideas about emotional agility mean in terms of a beneficial lens on it. I wasn't quite sure, so I took a little bit of a deep dive into some of her interviews and podcasts, and there's one that I really appreciated that she said to remember that your feelings and thoughts are not facts. And so when you approach things saying that, okay, I am sad today, or in my case, this project is a waste of time. Now, rather than recognizing that you're saying that doesn't make it so, I like the fact that she's saying what you need to do is think about it in terms of, okay, I acknowledge and I see that I'm feeling that this project is a waste of time, but that doesn't mean it's so. So that you're able then to kind of shift and say, okay, this project has to get done. And so you ask your team, how can we make this project work? And therefore, you're not saying this project is a waste of time. You are understanding that that's how you're feeling about it, but you need to move beyond that. So I appreciated that. And then the other thing that I think, what I've gathered from reading and listening to her approach is this question of failure. Oftentimes, most of us don't try something because we think we're going to fail. And one of the things that we have to understand is that it's okay to fail. And many of the large captains of industry have said, if you don't fail spectacularly, then you don't succeed spectacularly because you've had that big mistake and that big failure, but it's not fatal. You don't die from it, right? You learn from it. And so the idea of fear being, able to kind of, freeze you in your tracks, therefore you don't get traction. So I've learned that failure, can be something that is a learning experience, but you also have to understand that there's something to be gained from that. And then you can have that emotional agility and fail with a team and then have everybody come to the table and say, why did that happen? Here's what I thought happened. What did you think happened? Maybe we didn't have all the best practices. So I think, for me, I've learned that those strategies that she employs, things that were intuitive in some of our respects and some of the things that we've learned as leaders, but I liked having a language that she provides for us to think about it.
Okay, another book to read. So let's talk about role models and mentors for you. Was there anyone in your life who was an inspiration to you in terms of the resilience they showed, the openness, the flexibility in a leadership role? Not necessarily a colleague, although certainly colleagues and peers can be leaders when they step out in front of everybody else. Was there somebody who comes to mind? And I have to say, when I started Antioch, I was the only woman director of a campus in the country, and there were 11 at the time. And I only had that sort of more masculine directness style to use, and it was very difficult to find my voice in that context. We have a very different situation today with women in supervisory management leadership roles. Who comes to mind? Anybody? Can you think of anybody, or are you forging your own path? Tania, looks like the wheels are turning. I know they are.
So sometimes we think, all right, is there somebody who I can look up to who's like me? And as a biracial Asian American, bisexual, Jewish, Buddhist woman, have a lot of trouble sometimes finding someone who's an exact match. And I have had wonderful mentors in my life and in my career. And none of them have been an exact match for me. And I think that that's just important to remember. When I first came to UCSB, Don Atkinson was just such a strong mentor for me, straight white man from the Midwest. And, I learned so much from him. And I will just say one of my favorite things that I learned from him was just that, he said, if you're in this job long enough, you will at times be like the golden child in the department, and at times you can be like the worst villain in people's eyes. And that's just, you're going to go through those ups and downs. And I think that is one of the most helpful things that I have learned in my career, is that if you are doing your job or your life or your relationships for long enough, they will just go through these patterns and these periods, and not to get too thrown off by the highs or the lows. So
there can be people we meet, wouldn't you say, who demonstrate great skills in one domain, but maybe not, somebody you want to emulate every single thing as if you were playing their role yourself. Jackie, is there somebody who comes to mind in your case?
I think it's less one person who comes to mind as traits.
Composite.
Yeah, of people that come to mind. I think I've always respected people who have a lot of grace that they're able to give to others around them, and I hope that's something that I can emulate. I've been in situations where I've been granted grace, and so I try to do that for others because I know how important it is. I have had people who I think are absolutely fantastic listeners, and that's something that I'm trying to grow at. I'm a really great talker. Listening is still something I'm working on, but being able to do that, and I think one of the greatest gifts that I got from those that I worked with, and again, this goes back to that idea of failure and mistakes, and maybe this is something I should work on with my therapist, but it's always been when somebody says, it's okay that happened, and you're okay. It's not a reflection on you. I had a mentor once say to me when I revealed what I thought was this kind of professionally damaging mistake, and she called it an AFGO. I don't know how many people know what an AFGO is. I'm not going to say the entire thing. You can fill in the the F. Another effing growth opportunity. I use AFGO all the time because that's what it is. So being able to hear that from someone you respect and someone that has power is just really powerful for me.
I bet you do that with others.
I try to. I try to.
As a result, you know that feeling of huge relief because we're such critics of ourselves. Anna, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, two role models come to mind. One is Dr. Claudine Michel, who was the one who, when I first came to UCSB, sort of tapped me and said, she's going to be the next center director. When she did approach me about it, because she was going to be relinquishing the role and asked if I would, consider running for it or applying for it, I said, oh, no, because I want to start my own center. I want to start my Center for Information Technology. And then she, said to me, look, Anna, you can do that at the center. You don't have to build a whole new thing, just incorporate your work here. And that was an eye-opener for me, because not only was it a kind of way for me to hear, because I'm often, I want to do my own, but I also recognized the brilliance of that because it allowed me to import my new thing into an established thing. So I appreciated that. But also that she was someone who opened doors for me that then taught me how to open doors for other women, particularly in not so welcoming spaces. So I really appreciated that. On the board, I have really been impressed with the style of leadership that's happened with the presidents of the board. And as a vice president right now, I'm seeing, what that means. And, so the ability to allow voices to proceed where I would be ready to get that gavel and it's time's up. But just to kind of, let people talk. And the thing I am working on, though, is having a poker face. I do not have a poker face. You can see everything that's going on because I'm like, so I'm trying to kind of, be much more kind of imperceptible in terms of my feelings, but, so I'm working on it. But I've seen leadership that allows all kinds of contested voices to be heard and different voices to be heard. But in that hearing, then people get a sense of, okay, well, I said my piece and, so now there. And it works. And, where I would be a little bit more, well, okay, you had your 3 minutes, okay, it's time to, And sometimes you have to kind of let people go, and because maybe the next person's only going to take 2 minutes, So you can still kind of keep the meeting going on track. So, I've seen leadership styles that I think do the best with emotional intelligence that I can learn from.
Linda.
Yeah, this was on the pre-question list, and I was like, I got a lot of mentors. Luckily, I think I'm very fortunate in that way. And I think the quality for me was the person who helped me better see who I really am and pushed me to that. So I would say a high school coach, Sue Beatty, who just recently passed, saw potential in me. She worked with me after school so I could get a scholarship, it's not to play field hockey in college. I have, people who have just seen leadership qualities in me and encouraged them in me and even called me on my mistakes. That's sometimes the best that can happen. Lillian Roybal Rose is another one of my mentors. it's folks who just really, like Anna said, like, Claudine, Michelle, just amazing people who see us and they go, this is what you can do, this is who you can be, and help to let us know that we're loved no matter what, the mistakes and all. And, the list goes on, but it's that quality of person who can really see you and help you see yourself so you can get yourself to the next level, which is only going to help everybody else. So, thank you.
Thank you,
Dr.
Linda.
Anna Everett
Thank
right
you.
here. Right?
So my last question to you before we take questions, and if you have a question, I think we may have to use the microphone to retrieve. I don't know if people have papers to give us questions, but my last question to you is thinking about the future. What is on your growing edge as a leader, as a source of inspiration, maybe as a disruptor, a role model, a person who is emotionally agile? So I'm going to start with you, Anna. What's it looking like? What's the future looking like?
So I didn't get a job, my ideal job, and that really kind of stuck with me. And one of the things that I appreciate, again, in taking this deep dive into emotional agility, is I realized that several of those resentments that I've held onto have become for me this thing that I have to work on and not letting that be me, because I'm pissed off that I didn't get that job, as opposed to I'm feeling this sense of being done wrong, and I can deal with that because it's not all of me, right? So as I was talking about having those feelings of embracing failure, not go out and seek failure, but when it happens, that you're not destroyed by it, but also contextualizing that in all the successes that I've had. So I'm able to kind of have an equilibrium, when I think about that awful injustice, and I think about, but look at all the things that you've accomplished, right? So I get to do that. I think for just going forward is the consulting business and DEI that I've been working on. I really want to kind of immerse myself in that a little bit more, particularly now when there's this backlash, and I just want to be much more, committed to it, and work towards making people understand that it's not something you're giving up to have that inclusion. So, that's kind of, what's most present for mind for me right now.
Thank you. Someone else?
Yeah, go to Tania next.
Go to Tania. Okay. Okay, mind reading going on here.
Okay. So, having been a professor for over 25 years, I'm now doing much more public-facing work. Rather than generating the knowledge as a researcher, I'm trying to translate the knowledge to the general public to provide some support and guidance, particularly as we try to navigate the challenges of living in a divided nation. And it's weird being more public. It's hard because there's a balance. I'm like, I don't think that my hot take on everything is very important. I don't think that people need to know what I think about every single thing. And so I try to just kind of stay quiet about a lot of things and listen hard to what other people are putting out there. But I have to put myself out there sometimes too. And that's really my growing edge. I have this new book coming out, and it's not going to make everybody happy. And so I'm a little nervous about that. But there were some things that I felt like I have to say these things because this is what we need. And it's all super evidence-based. But it's not necessarily what we're already doing. So that is my challenge right now, is putting myself out there in ways that aren't going to make everybody happy, that it's important to share my voice, and at the same time to recognize, just sort of, like I was saying before, what am I missing still? What are the limitations of that view, and how can I put my voice out there and listen to other voices at the same time?
Thank
And I'm professionally coming full circle now. I was a high school teacher first before I got my master's and came to UCSB. And I was there for 20 years, and then I took the early retirement to be natural health care practitioner, adjunct faculty, and consultant, and was able to struggle building those practices, quite honestly, feeling like a failure because they weren't, I quit this job so I could do this, and then all of a sudden now they're happening, and then this job came up. And I've only applied for 2 jobs since I retired, and this was one of them. And I feel like I'm the director of organizational development in a major university that has gone through all this change and is coming. I like the word endemic instead of post-pandemic. And I feel like my experience I got there, I always say I feel like I got a degree in organizational development anyway from all the professional development we got. And I had great mentors like Jill Hurd, who's in the office today. And then I went and learned and taught all these courses in human skills, and it all boils down to what another mentor, I can now talk about mentors without crying, but those were tears of love. I just learned to say that when you cry and you don't want to apologize, those are tears of love. And thank you, Anna, for the human connection, right? That's what, I was going to say, Patty Igian always said, human connection and relationship is the thing. And so I'm looking forward to going back to UCSB and using all the skills I gained, plus the new skills I have and the new mentors and people I've worked with who I've just loved dearly, and then to help chart the course for them, for us, for the next, however long.
Yeah, I think I passed because this is an area of struggle for me right now. So I was having a difficult time identifying exactly what it was that I would say. I was hoping to just crib off all the other answers. But it's just, I feel as if I've been very fortunate in my life. I tell students when they're like, how did you do this or how did you do that? And I can't tell them. I feel like I jumped into the ocean of adulthood and just the tides took me places and doors opened and I walked through and other opportunities emerged and here I am. And so now I feel like I need to be a little bit more deliberate and figure out what is next for me. I'm at the age now where the tides are not necessarily carrying me to the next thing as they did when I was younger. The doors aren't necessarily as obviously open as they were when I was younger, or there's not necessarily those mentors who say, look at what potential you have, and kind of pushing me forward into my professional life. So really needing to sit back and think about what is it that I do want to do, how do I want to use kind of the next step in my professional life is a very different way for me to approach it and much more challenging.
Are there questions from the audience? So what we're going to do now is take some questions if there are, and then I'm going to say a few things to wrap it up. And there is a reception in the lobby, and everyone is welcome to stay. So we'll just take a few minutes. We've got a mic available. Somebody has a question. And would you say if you'd like to ask a person or everyone?
I would like to ask this question.
What's your name?
Hi, my name's Regina. I work in the Learning Resources Center at City College. And thank you for the talk. It's been great. One of the questions I had for the panel, two of the speakers talked about having an awakening or realization that they were depressed or that they took on too much. And so I would be curious to know, what are your self-care practices, being women in leadership, and to just being able to manage stress and sort of the heavy responsibilities that come with being in a leadership role that can be really challenging at times, especially when you're having to balance different groups of people and sometimes with conflicting needs. Thanks.
So, stress that comes from balancing different groups of people.
Okay, I think we're on? All right. Great question, Regina, and nice to see you. A lot of people ask the question, what do I do when someone does this to me or when I'm in this situation? And my answer I get from another mentor, Dr. Sue Morter, she said, well, we can tell you what to do in that moment, but really what it matters is the in-between moments. It's not necessarily just that moment, it's the stress that we carry all the time. And so my suggestion is we have to watch what we're eating. We have to, this is just think of your car. You put unleaded gas in your car to get it to run. If we're not feeding ourselves nutritious food, if my wife is here, she's looking at me like, okay, are you listening? Like, you're saying this? Yeah. Water. The brain is a hydroelectric plant. We've got to be drinking plenty of water. We need to be exercising. We need to be walking every day. I take a day or two off. And I don't mean like, weights and make it. Just go walk, get outside, nature. And one of the biggest stressors is what we think. And so when we stay in the constant buzz, we think too much, right? We've had too much to think, is another way of saying it. And so sometimes just resting your brain for, I know, I got to do that better, for 15 minutes a day, at different periods, then when you go to bed at night, you know you haven't given yourself time to think. If when you lay your head down, you're like, oh, dang, ooh, you could write a book about what's going on in your head. So it's those in-between moments where we take care of what we eat, we drink plenty of water, we get some exercise, we rest, and we breathe. We need to be breathing in and out through our nose to get the oxygen to the brain. When we mouth breathe, which many of us do, it elicits the fight or flight response, which then dumps the chemicals, cortisol, into your system, and adrenaline, which wreak havoc unless you're ready to fight the bear or run across to get out of the way of a moving car. So in the moment, though, the best thing I can tell you to do is to put your feet flat on the floor. If you're sitting at a desk, you put your hands or your elbows on the table, and you just breathe in and out through your nose. In for a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold out for 4. That's 16 seconds, which is the pause sometimes we need to make that better, more emotionally intelligent response to whatever's going on.
I'm going to ask Anna to comment, and then we want to hear from a few more of you before we break up for the reception. So, yes.
Yeah, 2 things. Everything that Linda said. And 2 things for me. I try to get on the treadmill and walk and think through some of the things. So that's one. And then I watch cooking videos on YouTube. because I get to kind of, maybe I'll try that, so that's what I do for self-care.
Find something that's fun. Okay, do we
Can I
have another
add one
question?
quick?
Can we have one more question?
Can I add one quick thing?
Oh,
We don't always talk about faith. And I do have a faith practice, my Buddhist practice. And so I have to say something that connects you in with some force, energy, belief that's larger than yourself, I think is also a really important tool, resource.
Centering. Okay, we had another question from somebody.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a student at City College, and I work at Samarkand, a retirement community here in town. And my question is for any of the panelists who'd like to answer. With having DEI initiatives and just change in general, when we want to try to make effective change and material change in our workplaces or in our schools, for somebody from the younger generation, what is a really good way for us to approach maybe the stubborn or rigid people who, just want to stay where we're at, or they say, I appreciate the conversation we're having. I acknowledge it's good to have these conversations, but maybe another time. That's something I hear a lot.
So yes, that is a challenge, and we're not all in the same place with things. In fact, probably any one person isn't in the same place as any other person around change and wanting things to stay the same. So that's where I think those conversations that we can have with people, having dialogue, and dialogue I define as a conversation that promotes connection and understanding. Both of those things are important. And so we sometimes think it's about us expressing something to other people to show them something that they don't know. Nobody wants us to do that, it turns out. So what we need to do is find out more from them. Like, we need to listen to them and again see what are we missing, and establish that relationship. And once we have that relationship, then they might be interested in what we have to say also. But you've got to have that connection if you want to accomplish any of your goals, no matter what they are.
Jackie, did you want to add anything? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I can. I think the other place, in terms of changing someone's mind, it's really challenging. It's difficult to change my mind. I don't think I'm rigid, but I think I'm right most of the time. So, but I think common goals. So we may not agree about how to get someplace, but we may agree that, yes, that's a good goal to get to. And so I think identifying what's the common ground is really key. I think the other thing is sometimes we look for the decision maker to be the one to say, okay, we're going to change this. When I want everyone in the room to think of themselves as leaders, everyone can lead a movement to change. It doesn't have to be the person who is at the top that is implementing the change. Going around to all the other people who are part of that community and seeing where they are with that very issue can help groundswell change in ways that a top-down doesn't. So it's incredibly challenging. I've been on the front end of making policy changes. I had the benefit, and I'm in a crowd where not everyone knows what this law is, and for that I'm thankful, helping repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the number of different avenues that were taken, it looked like it was just a legislative change, but what it took to get that legislative change was a lot of different avenues taken for that one common goal. And it didn't even reach the goal it wanted, which was to prohibit discrimination within the military. It simply repealed it. But it was an acceptable change. It got us a little bit closer. So I think it's important to not think about changing one person's mind, but what are all the other avenues that one can take to get the change that you want to get?
And I think related to that is, if you see an injustice, if you see something, be an ally to that person who's maybe being, wrongly or being characterized in such a way, and be a support. So in that way, you get to model a kind of change that you want to see, and then, these other strategies. But, be an ally. If someone is being, not recognized, somebody says something, I know as a Black woman who's used to saying something, and then it doesn't count until somebody else says it, and then somebody, you can say, I think what Anna said was right. And I think I agree with that. Something as small as that can often make a difference when nobody's speaking up for that person, or, something to that effect. But, in addition to those other things, like be an ally, be somebody who learn about it and then, be an advocate.
So in wrapping up this panel, I just have a few things to say. Thank you so much. First of all, the panel was fabulous. And I think they raised some questions that are worth continuing to ponder about the nature of leadership, and perhaps giving you an appreciation of the complexity of being in a leadership role. You can be in a leadership role by speaking up and saying something that's bold, offering a very innovative idea nobody else would have thought of, and therefore changing the direction of a conversation, which is easier when the person in charge allows that to be the kind of culture you have, where everybody is valued and feels important. And I was thinking back to my days at UCSB when I studied leadership, and we had this image of the leader, as the gray hair, gray sideburns guy who was in charge of everything and would step out ahead of everybody else because he knew more. And, change is happening so fast. And we understand the value of having people at a table or in discussion with different insights, wisdom, experiences, and knowledge, information about technology, about finance, about strategy, about competitors, about what else is happening in other law schools, universities, and colleges, and then everybody's smarter when you have that kind of culture. So I think we're in the process, those of us who are progressive, of redefining leadership in a way, first of all, because women have advanced into leadership roles, and that's changing everything, and because There are so many problems facing us of a complexity we never could have predicted. So we need everybody to be sharing what they know and what they feel. And I hope today's conversation has given you some food for thought. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've learned a lot I don't know about you guys, okay? Everyone, the words of wisdoms and the insights to give us. Before we end, of course, we're leaving out to nourish ourselves with good food and everything and rest and social. I just want to remind our students here is that when you come to class, education is not just about classroom. It's not just about memorizing textbook. Education is about connection. Education is about thinking about when you graduate, how can you solve problems and make the world a better place? Now, you may wonder, is that all these people, the smart people here, is that, I mean, by the time you graduate, you probably have no problem to solve. Don't worry, because the world is always changing. And when you walk into any workplace, there are always problems. Won't you agree? Okay. So, in a sense, you may think that, oh my goodness, the world is very difficult. But on the other hand, you have to think about, particularly those of you who are looking for jobs, don't worry. This is job security. You always have things to do, okay? So I bid you goodbye, and thank you very much for coming. And thank you for Business 101, the class Business 101, and also the class from Antioch, Managing Global Environment, who help out to set up. Thank you, thank you. We'll see you out there. Enjoy the food.